This new book, Studies in the Pauline Epistles, Essays in Honor of Douglas J. Moo, is an attempt to show honor to a renowned New Testament scholar, someone who has written on many subjects, but has focused his efforts on Pauline studies and Bible translation. So we've assembled this remarkable team of scholars, people that you would recognize from having read their books, men like D.A. Carson, G.K. Beale, N.T. Wright, James Dunn, Stephen Westerholm, Robert Yarborough, Craig Blomberg, and many others who have written on various aspects of Pauline studies, history, theology, chronology, hermeneutics. All of these different areas are found in this particular volume. Studies in the Pauline Epistles has the opportunity to make a significant contribution to several different areas in the discussion of Paul. For example, the two essays on the old perspective and the new perspective, written by scholars who don't hold those views, has the opportunity to perhaps move us even further past this artificial divide between either new perspective or old perspective towards a larger consensus in understanding Paul and his theology and its relationship to the Old Testament. Speaking of the Old Testament, you also have a couple of essays in there that deal with Paul's use of the Old Testament and how it functioned in his theology and in his application to the church of how to live as followers of Christ. Also interesting is this essay by Craig Blomberg, who has written an essay trying to take some of those same methods of studying Paul's use of the Old Testament in the New to his use of the Jesus tradition and seeing if we can find evidence in there of Paul's knowledge of familiarity with sayings of Jesus, events in Jesus' life, which has the potential to bring even further unity towards the New Testament, not posing Paul against Jesus, but showing Paul was fully aware of many of the aspects of Jesus' life and ministry and teaching. This book offers readers a window into key issues in Pauline studies today. It's broken into three main sections. There's a section on exegesis of Paul, where key texts are worked through in detail with implications spelled out. There's a very fascinating section on Paul and his use of the Old Testament, as well as the Jesus tradition, where we explore how the Apostle Paul interacted with the Old Testament, as well as the earliest traditions about Jesus. The third section is on Paul and his contemporary significance. And in this section, we have two fascinating essays by James Dunn and Stephen Westerholm. James Dunn is a well-known proponent of the new perspective on Paul, yet he wrote an essay on what's right about the old perspective on Paul. Stephen Westerholm, a well-known advocate of the old perspective on Paul, has written an essay on what's right about the new perspective on Paul. So it's fascinating to see these two well-known scholars be able to say something positive about the views that they do not hold. Studies in the Pauline Epistles would be an excellent tool to use in a class on Pauline theology or just on the life and ministry of Paul himself. When you consider the different aspects of Paul's theology that are exposed here, exegesis, his use of the Old Testament and the Jesus tradition, ongoing scholarly debates about how to best understand Paul's relationship to the Old Testament law, all of those provide a snapshot into the current world of what scholars are saying today about the Apostle Paul and would be able to fill in the gaps perhaps from a sort of general issue textbook that would give the basics but may not be able to give the most up-to-date and current thoughts of key Pauline scholars.